live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Hello, sir.
Hello students. Hey, what are you reading?
Sir, we are reading Martin Luther King Jr. speech, I Have a Dream.
That sounds very interesting.
Yes, sir, it's interesting, but it's pretty tough.
Yes, it's very tough.
Okay.
Sir, could you just explain what is Emancipation Proclamation?
Yeah, sure.
Sir, what is the Jim Crow law, sir?
And
Okay.
what is...
Okay. I believe that this is a very important text in the history of the United States. So let us sit together and talk about it extensively. Come. We all have dreams, don't we? But our dreams are our personal dreams, certain things which are very close to our heart. But there was a person whose dream changed the history and the fate of millions of people across the globe. His name was Martin Luther King Jr. He was junior because his great grandfather and his father were also of the same name, Martin Luther King Sr. They were all pastors, so he inherited a kind of tradition in his blood that was the tradition of preaching, and that tradition made the man what he was. We are talking here about the United States of the second half of the 20th century. And what you see, the United States today, it was not in the 1960s. It was a country full of racial hatred. There was the discrimination on the basis of the color of your skin and the economical status of the people. If you are a black man, you are not allowed to travel on the same train. If you are a black lady, you cannot enter from the front gate of a bus. If you are a black kid, you are not allowed to study in the same school. That was the height of the discrimination against which Martin Luther King waged a war. So he was, in a term, a pioneer of millions of people, and he was voicing their anguish, their anger at the front, which was at the national levels of the United States of America. It is very important to, before talking about I Have a Dream speech, to know what kind of person was behind it, right? He was a very precocious and very talented child. He was born in 1929 in the southern part of the United States, that was Georgia, Atlanta. And he died in 1968, such a small span of life. But at the age of 39, the person who died changed the history. He was pastor. Pastor, you know, is a kind of clergyman who delivers the sermons, the speech, and he is a kind of engineer of the soul rather than of the mind. He had one talent in his life that he could play with the words, and when Martin Luther King talks, you have to get enchanted. That was the power of Martin Luther King's speech. This speech, which we are going to talk about, was delivered in 1963. That was the peak time of racial hatred. There were two clefts in America that time. One which was guided by the young people, and they wanted violence. And the leader of this sect was the renowned politician Malcolm X. He was also a black Afro-American. The only difference from Martin Luther King was that he inherited Islam. He accepted Islam, and Martin Luther King was a Christian. So this is how there were two separate sects. He was talking about violence, Malcolm X, and he said bullet or ballot. Okay, if they are not giving us our rights, let us kill them. But at the other side, a single person was holding the faith of the God, and he was delivering one nation, one idea that I would like to quote here, and you can understand his ideas. What he said, and I quote, "When evil men plot, good men must plan. When evil men burn and bomb, good men must build and bind. When evil men shout ugly words of hatred, good men must commend themselves to the glories of love. When evil men would seek to perpetuate an unjust status quo, good men must seek to bring into being a real order of justice. That's the metaphor which he was putting forth in the mind of the young people, right? But the young people, most of the majorities, since you are having the young blood inside you, you tend to go towards the violent activities. But this person was totally against it, because when he was a student in the university, he was influenced by Thurman and by the great Indian leader, none other than our Mahatma Gandhi, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. His influence, his idea of non-violence, ahimsa what you call, and his philosophy of life, Martin Luther King adopted as it was. And he showed the world that how the ideas of a different nation can be used in a nation which was full of racial hatred. And with this weapon of ahimsa, non-violence, he fought the war against the white people who were having the dogs with them, who were having the horses with them, and they would kill you at the instance you commit a mistake. Before this speech, we will try to understand what caused Martin Luther King to deliver this speech in 1963. Why he walked with 120,000 people, that is a quarter of the million people were walking with him. As you can remember, at the Dandi Yatra with our nation leader Mahatma Gandhi, millions of people were walking. He also walked with them to show the power of the democracy. He walked and he chose the land of Abraham Lincoln. He delivered a speech, and it was delivered at the Lincoln Memorial. Down in the shadow of that pool, with the lingering memories of that nation and that man, he delivered the speech. His turn was the last, but it is said that when he started to deliver the speech, "I have a dream today," the clouds were resounding with the voice of Martin Luther King, and the full nation, a quarter of million people who were present there, and more than a million people who were watching Martin Luther King, decided that day, this is the end. After 1960s, the history of the United States was changed, and this is how we will see in the text what are the ideas of Martin Luther King that he incorporated into this speech. Before going into this important text, it is very important what made Martin Luther King to draw a lot of historical and biblical allusions and some references. So let me tell you a bit of history of this text. What were the major references which he brought from the history of the United States? As you know, that America was also a colony of Great Britain. So in this text, when you will hear the Declaration of Independence, Martin Luther King is actually referring to the year 1776. When America got its independence, what happened after this is very crucial. As you can see in this American map, there are 50 states, and in the 1860s, it was divided into northern part of the United States and southern part. And Martin Luther King was born in the southern part of United States. Why this part was so important to him? Because black people, those who were Afro-American, Africa, the continent, they were brought from Africa, crossing the Atlantic Ocean, and they were disposed at the southern part of the United States. They were slave, and the majority in the southern state was that of black people. Then after the independence of the United States, there was a civil war. What is a civil war? It is a war of internalized powers. It is a war inside the nation. So the war broke out in 1861 between the northern part and the southern part of the United States, and there was mutiny, there was blood, there was violence. White people didn't want black people to have any authority in religion, in politics, in education, nowhere. For them, these people were animals. They treated them as animals, and their fault was only because they came from Africa. Their color of the skin was black. Being black was a curse at that time, and Martin Luther King fought because he comes from the black background. He fought for this, and as we are talking about this civil war, you need to keep it in your mind that that civil war broke out in 1861, and this was the time when Abraham Lincoln delivered his own speech. What he did, he was the president of the United States that time. He ordered to free the slaves from the southern part of the United States. That's why it is known as emancipation. It's a kind of freedom for the slaves. And he also delivered a very famous speech with which Martin Luther King starts his own speech. 1863 to 1963, nothing changed for the black people and the slaves in America. And this speech comes at the highest peak of this movement. Exactly after this speech, it was delivered in 1963, and in 1964, what they were asking for, the then President of the United States, President Johnson, signed the Civil Rights Act, and they got what they were asking for. But for this speech was a turning point. So, in the second half of the first paragraph, he says that we are cheated, and here he uses a metaphor, an economical metaphor, the metaphor of a blank check. Throughout the speech, it is a very serious speech, but here he is a bit funny. He makes fun of the government by saying that we have not given any rights and the check has bounced. And then he denies that I am not ready to believe that among the prosperity of a country like the United States, where white people are enjoying the riches, how a black person can die due to hunger. And there comes the reason of this speech, and he says, and so we have come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. It was shameful on the behalf of white people that they could not understand the majority of black people in the United States. He wanted equality, law, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. These were the three golden words which came from the Declaration of Independence. And there was a kind of script which was written by Thomas Jefferson, and he used a sentence there, let there be law, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. He was checking it after 200 years, is it fulfilled? And he was sorry to feel that it was not fulfilled at all. After this militant tone of Martin Luther King, he turns to his own people. Now the tone is a bit milder in the speech. So it was a big influence. He knew this, so he prepared this speech before 3 days. But he was not easy with the flow because he is a kind of speaker who speaks at the moment, right? So he started to speak from his own heart, the heart which was with his own people, the black folks. And here comes the influence of Mahatma Gandhi on him, a clear-cut influence which you can easily see in this paragraph. He says, we must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. A key idea is there. Try to understand this, the creative suffering. What is creative suffering? It is what is in Hindu mythology. If there is a trouble in front of you, suffer yourself. Don't kill the other person. Suffer yourself and go through a suffering which will make you so strong that you come out as a champion of liberty. The old people and the people who knew that one day freedom will come to us because of our religious beliefs, they were with Martin Luther King. But don't forget, he was only 34 years old at that time, and he was moving the nation with his speech. So he talked about the soul. Make your soul so powerful that it cannot go out. And when he was delivering the speech, the young kids, the people, the ladies and the old people started to sing the song. The songs like, we have a right to vote, let us wait, a song which was of the hope. And there is the trouble among the mob, let us wait, a thing which expects sorrow. So there was a shift from sorrow to hope, and that was due to Martin Luther King's intonation. He moved with the past historical moment, and then he came on a declaration of hope. a hope that one day America will change. One day we will get what we want to get. And there is a later speech which is very important here, and if we link that speech to this link, you can understand what was his faith. And I want to quote those lines where he says, and this speech is known as I have been to the mountain top, and he says, I don't know what will happen now. We have got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't really matter with me now because I have been to the mountain top. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I am not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And God's will was to promote Martin Luther King and to see that nation's destiny is changed. He changed it with the non-violence movement, the movement which says do not kill the other, love your enemy. He gave one gospel, and he was from the biblical background. He says, even if your enemy hates you, love him. It is because of love that the racial hatred in the heart of the white people will be moved. But there were some people who were not agreeing with Martin Luther King's idea. And there was a notorious governor in the southern part of the United States, and he was the governor of Alabama. He was a notorious person whose reference he takes in this speech, and he says that that governor didn't allow a black man or a woman to be taught in the Alabama University, and there was violence due to that cause. That's where he talks about in this second part of this, when he talks about the notorious governor of Alabama. The origin of the American dream again lies into the Declaration of Independence. That time when the declaration was there was one line which is very important, and I would like to quote that line so you can understand the essence of American dream, and you can compare this dream with the dream of Martin Luther King. He says, all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These were the lines which were written into the Declaration of Independence. Everything was for only the white people. This is known as Jim Crow law. A law which came into the sensibility of America automatically. It was not a government official law. It was a law where some comic people, some who were in opera, some who were doing the dramas, they came, and especially white people, they started to put the black cream on their face. So they would turn black. A white person who is imitating to become black by putting the black cream on his face, and then he would make his lips broader and whiter with that. So you look like a monkey. And then they would do the drama making fun of black people. They will show as if they are monkeys, they are still not human beings, they are animals. That was known as Jim Crow law. Even in one of his earlier speeches, when he was going against the government in Birmingham, he was put into the jail. And one of the most important speeches of Martin Luther King comes from the jail. It is titled as The Letter from Birmingham Jail. It was published in 1963. And how it changed the concept of American dream, he used the term there also. It is very important to understand here that once he is out of political leader mode and now he is talking from his own heart, he is using the recurrent images which he had used before in his own speeches. And you would understand what he means by American dream, why this dream was not fulfilled, why these people were betrayed and beguiled, and why at the beginning of this speech he uses the metaphor of check, where he says it is not given back to us. It means the American dream is only for a particular class and a particular color. This American dream cannot be shared black people's point of view who live in that country. This text in the second part is so important because there are a lot of colors. There is the geographical color, there is the color of the tree, there is the color of emotion. It is a cosmopolitan dream. At the same time, it is a local dream, and he makes it the personal dream. And there comes the most important, the most memorable lines of this speech. He says,
I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
That was the resonance after every sentence. That is known as a very famous literary device, anaphora. Anaphora is a rhetoric device which is used by the oratorical speakers, and he, since he was very good at speaking, he could talk hours together from his heart, and his voice had a depth. It was not shallow. He could bring the message down deep to your heart with his voice. That was the beauty of Martin Luther King. He was their Jesus Christ because he was voicing their aspirations and their dreams. This is how this dream comes true in form of a national leader who was talking there on their behalf. And at the end, he goes back to a reference where in 1952, the great Reverend Archibald Carey Jr., he delivered a speech in 1952. He takes that speech, first 2 lines, and he ends his speech with that ode of the nation, the ode of great America. These are the most beautiful lines at the end when he realized that crowd has become one with me. And this is the high point. I can give the kick to their emotions and they will go beyond the national boundaries. So he located everything. Here the nation or the nationhood or the personal guises are over, and is talking about every national region, especially the southern part of America. He talks about the mountain and the valleys of southern America and names them to see and to show that there is the story behind every stone in Black America. Every stone which is thrown or which is present there, there is the blood behind that. So he uses the adjectives like red hills. You know why hills are red? Because there is the blood of the people who died for the freedom, right? So this is how he uses these sentences. Prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, mighty mountains of New York, heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, curvaceous slopes of California, from Stone Mountain of Georgia, Lookout Mountains of Tennessee, every hill and molehill of Mississippi. He ends with the state Mississippi because Mississippi was the cruelest state where people were just killing each other. What he wants to show by taking the names of these geographical locations is that this is how these geographical mountains, mountain is a metaphor of height, it is a metaphor of generosity. You need to look at the mountains which God has given you, learn something from nature, become one with nature, and try to fulfill the dream which he had in his eyes. And later on, at the end, he gives his personal feelings which are particularly his own. And I would like to quote this paragraph where he says, when this happens, when we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up the day when all God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestant and Catholics will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. This is where the wish of a religious preacher comes true. And these are the last 2 lines which are inscribed and written on the tomb of Martin Luther King. He who was asking about non-violence, he went for a movement in Memphis and he was shot there. He was shot by a white person because they didn't like his ideologies. They were not with him. So outside in the balcony of his hotel, at the young age of 39, he was shot. and within 1 hour that great leader was dead. Now let us talk about the literary devices. When you read a text, there are very common literary devices like alliteration, like metaphor, like the constructing ideas which go side by side. You will find the plethora, the plenty of these ideas in the speech. Most important thing and the most favorite device of Martin Luther King was anaphora. What is anaphora? Anaphora is the repetition of certain words at the beginning of the sentence. For instance, he says, I have a dream, and then he talks something. After that, again he will say, I have a dream, and at the beginning of every sentence, he will say, I have a dream today. Why does he do this? So the idea and the notion of his heart can be impressed in the mind of the audience, right? That's anaphora. And the second device which he recurrently used in this text and which makes this text as a beautiful religious text also is the device of biblical allusion. There are two important quotations in the text. You can see they are in inverted commas, which he took from the Bible, King James Bible, which itself is considered as a milestone in history of literature. And I will give you two examples so you can see and compare how he used this and what was the influence of this. The first word which I am speaking here is used by Martin Luther King himself. He says, dark and desolate valley of segregation. And what is in the Bible? Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. You know the metaphor of valley itself. Valley is something which is deep, and he wanted at the end of his speech that let everything be equal. If you will go in heaven, you will see that there are no mountains, no valleys. The ground is equal. What it is showing? It is showing the equality of humankind, right? The idea came from the Bible for him, and he puts it beautifully like this. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed and all flesh shall see it together. That quotation comes from the Bible, which he uses in his speech. And as you can see, he is talking not only about personal equality, he is talking about geographical equality. Because the people who were staying in the southern part of America were not only discriminated on religious background or economical background, they were discriminated on geographical background also, because it's a hilly area. In the southern part, there are a lot of hills. That's why he uses the names of a lot of hills at the end, right? And another important device is that of metaphor. Metaphor is a kind of comparison between the ideas, so the thought can come to you in a comparative mode. And here are some of his important metaphors. From every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, sweltering with the heat of injustice and sweltering with the heat of oppression. That's how he uses the metaphor again and again. As I told you in the beginning, there is the metaphor which is the economical metaphor, the cash check. That is also a metaphor. You can say normally that they didn't give us the money, but he used the word the cash check is not given to us. That's how these great writers use the metaphors, so the impression on the listeners and the audience is greater than life and they become memorable. That's why this text is prescribed in literature books, because it became a literary marvel. And the last device which he uses in his text is the repetition of the different ideas together, and he puts it together. For instance, white and black, good and bad, right? Man and woman, and then he puts it together to show you two different sides of the coins together. So you can know if this side is the black, that side is the white, and they both are together. That is his whole idea. And here are those lines, the contrasting ideas: slavery and brotherhood, oppression and freedom, segregation and integration, despair and hope, and jangling discourse and a beautiful symphony. This is how, by the use of all these literary devices, this text has become one of the best literary texts in the history of literature itself, right? Any questions now?
Do you think after the election of Afro-American Barack Obama as the President of United States, King's dream has come true?
Well, I don't know the dream has come true or not. I think it would be better if we find a possible solution altogether.
No, I don't think that the dream has come true because there is still a lot of racial discrimination all across the globe.
Yeah, that's true. You are right.
I think the dream has come true up to a certain extent because Afro-American President Barack Obama representing the nation of black and white people alike.
So we'll have to wait whether King's dream has come true or not.